The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Crimson buzzed with the usual evening chatter. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of metal tables where soldiers sat hunched over their trays, shoveling down whatever the kitchen had managed to prepare that day. The air hung thick with the smell of overcooked vegetables and recycled air conditioning. Lieutenant Sarah Chen moved through the serving line with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and precise. At 5 feet 6 inches, she appeared unremarkable among the sea of camouflage uniforms. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her uniform bore no special insignia that would draw attention. To any casual observer, she was just another soldier grabbing dinner after a long day. But Sarah carried herself differently than most. There was something in the way she moved, a controlled grace that spoke of countless hours of training. Her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, noting exits, potential threats, and the positioning of everyone around her. These habits had been drilled into her through years of specialized training that few people in the world ever experienced. Sarah had arrived at the base 3 days earlier as part of a classified operation. Her cover was simple. She was a logistics officer conducting routine supply chain assessments. The reality was far more complex. She was a member of SEAL Team 6, one of only a handful of women to complete the grueling selection process and earn the coveted Trident pin. Her presence at this remote outpost was part of a sensitive intelligence-gathering mission that required her particular skill set. The base housed roughly 800 personnel from various branches of the military. Most were Army, with a smattering of Air Force and Marines. Navy personnel were rare here, which made Sarah's cover both easier to maintain and more precarious. She had to blend in while avoiding too much scrutiny that might expose her true identity. As she moved through the line, Sarah noticed 3 soldiers at a corner table. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, and Specialist Jake Morrison had been watching her since she arrived at the base. She had cataloged them immediately as potential problems. Webb was the leader, a career soldier with multiple deployments who carried himself with the swagger of someone who thought his rank gave him certain privileges. Rodriguez was his lieutenant, smaller but meaner, with dead eyes that reminded Sarah of predators she had encountered in various corners of the world. Morrison was the youngest, probably early 20s, trying to prove himself to the older soldiers by adopting their worst behaviors. The 3 had made several attempts to approach her over the past few days. Their comments had started as seemingly innocent questions about her assignment, but quickly devolved into increasingly inappropriate suggestions about how she might spend her off-duty time. Sarah had deflected each approach professionally, using her cover identity to maintain distance while avoiding any confrontation that might blow her operation. Tonight felt different. The mess hall was less crowded than usual, with many soldiers either on duty or catching up on sleep. The 3 men had positioned themselves strategically near the exit, and Sarah could feel their attention focusing on her like a laser. Their body language suggested they had moved beyond casual harassment into something more planned and deliberate. Sarah collected her tray. Tonight's offering appeared to be some form of chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans that had seen better days, and surveyed the seating options. She could sit near the kitchen staff, which would provide witnesses, but might also create complications if things escalated. She could choose a table near the main entrance, but that would require passing close to Webb and his friends. Or she could select one of the isolated tables toward the back of the hall, which would give her more room to maneuver but fewer potential allies. The choice was made for her when Webb stood up and began walking in her direction, his companions flanking him in a loose formation that blocked several potential escape routes. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Her breathing slowed and steadied. Her grip on the tray shifted almost imperceptibly, changing from a simple carrying position to something that could be weaponized if necessary. Her peripheral vision expanded, taking in every detail of the room, the location of every other person, the positions of furniture, potential weapons, and most importantly, the exact positions and movement patterns of the three men approaching her. Webb's voice carried across the mess hall as he called out, "Hey there, Navy girl. Why don't you come sit with us real soldiers? We can show you how things work around here." The comment drew attention from other tables. Some soldiers looked up with mild curiosity before returning to their meals, while others watched with the uncomfortable awareness that something unpleasant was about to unfold. Sarah recognized the dynamic immediately. This was a test, both of her and of the room's willingness to intervene. Webb was counting on the bystander effect, the tendency of groups to assume someone else would step in if things went too far. Sarah set her tray down on the nearest empty table and turned to face the approaching soldiers. Her posture appeared relaxed, almost casual, but those with training would have recognized the coiled tension in her stance. She was balanced on the balls of her feet, weight distributed evenly, hands free and ready to move. Her voice was calm and level when she responded. "Thanks for the invitation, but I'm fine eating alone." Webb's smile had all the warmth of a shark's grin. "Now that's not very friendly. We're just trying to be welcoming to our new teammate. Isn't that right, guys?" Rodriguez and Morrison moved to flank her position, completing what they thought was a trap. Morrison, eager to prove himself, was the first to overstep the line. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't be stuck up. We know how to show a lady a good time." The word sweetheart hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the attention of the entire mess hall focusing on their confrontation. This was the moment when she had to decide how to play it. Her mission required maintaining her cover, but allowing these men to think they could intimidate her would only lead to escalation. And there were principles involved that went beyond the mission. Sarah had not fought her way through SEAL training, endured years of proving herself in a male-dominated field, and earned her place among the world's most elite warriors, only to be intimidated by 3 bullies in a mess hall. But she also couldn't reveal her true identity or capabilities without potentially compromising an operation that could affect national security. The tension in the room was palpable now. Other soldiers had stopped pretending to eat and were watching the confrontation unfold. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed to be waiting for entertainment. A few appeared ready to intervene if things went too far, but none had moved yet. Webb stepped closer, invading Sarah's personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. "You know, the thing about being new here is that you need friends, and we're offering to be very good friends. It would be a shame if you had to eat alone every night for the rest of your deployment." The threat was subtle but clear. "Cross us, and we'll make your life miserable." Sarah had heard variations of this speech in training scenarios, in real-world operations, and unfortunately in military settings where it had no place. She knew how this script was supposed to play out from their perspective. She would either give in to avoid confrontation, or she would resist ineffectively and be humiliated in front of the entire mess hall. What Webb and his companions didn't know was that they had just cornered one of the most dangerous human beings on the planet. Sarah's training encompassed not just physical combat, but psychological warfare, tactical assessment, and the ability to end threats quickly and efficiently. She had operated in hostile territory where a single mistake meant death. She had faced enemy combatants who were bigger, stronger, and more numerous than these 3 soldiers. But this situation required finesse. She needed to end the threat without revealing her true capabilities, maintain her cover identity, and do it all in a way that wouldn't create bigger problems down the line. As Webb reached out to grab her arm, Sarah made her decision. The next 45 seconds would change everything. Time seemed to slow as Webb's hand moved toward Sarah's arm. In that fraction of a second, her mind processed multiple variables with the speed and precision that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. Distance between targets, positioning of witnesses, available improvised weapons, exit routes, potential complications. Webb's fingers were still inches from contact when Sarah moved. Her left hand intercepted his reaching arm with surgical precision, fingers wrapping around his wrist in what appeared to be a simple defensive gesture. But the grip she applied hit specific pressure points that sent shooting pain up his arm and temporarily numbed his fingers. Webb's confident expression shifted to confusion as his hand suddenly refused to obey his commands. At the same moment, Sarah's right foot shifted backward in what looked like a nervous step away from confrontation. In reality, she was creating the perfect angle for what came next. Rodriguez, thinking he saw weakness, moved forward to grab her other arm. Sarah's body rotated smoothly, using Webb's captured wrist as a pivot point. The movement looked almost like a dance step, graceful and flowing. Rodriguez's hand closed on empty air as Sarah's elbow drove into his solar plexus with precisely calculated force. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but more than sufficient to fold him in half as his diaphragm spasmed and his breath disappeared. He dropped to his knees, gasping like a fish out of water, completely unable to participate in whatever his friends had planned. Morrison, the youngest and most eager to prove himself, saw his companions in trouble and reached for Sarah's shoulder from behind. This was exactly what she had been expecting. Without releasing Webb's wrist, Sarah ducked under Morrison's grab and spun behind him. Her free hand found the pressure point at the base of his neck, and Morrison suddenly found himself being guided face first into the metal table where Sarah had placed her tray. The collision wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, but it was loud enough to get everyone's attention and forceful enough to leave Morrison seeing stars. Mashed potatoes and green beans scattered across the table as Morrison's face planted in Sarah's dinner tray. He slumped forward, momentarily stunned and completely out of the fight. Webb, finally realizing that his easy target was anything but easy, tried to pull his trapped wrist free and swing at Sarah with his other hand. This was a mistake. Sarah had been controlling the pressure on his trapped arm, allowing him limited movement to avoid obviously demonstrating her training. When he escalated to actual violence, those restrictions disappeared. Sarah stepped into Webb's swing, getting inside his reach where his longer arms became a disadvantage. Her shoulder checked into his chest, driving him backward while maintaining control of his wrist. At the same time, her foot swept behind his ankle. Webb found himself suddenly airborne, spinning through a throw that deposited him hard on his back with Sarah kneeling beside him, his arm extended and controlled in a joint lock that could easily break his elbow if she applied more pressure. The entire confrontation had taken less than 15 seconds. Webb lay on his back, breathing hard, his arm locked in a position where any movement would cause excruciating pain. Rodriguez was still on his knees, slowly getting his breath back and looking like he might vomit. Morrison had managed to lift his head from the remains of Sarah's dinner, mashed potatoes still clinging to his face and uniform. Sarah's voice was calm and professional as she spoke, loud enough for the entire mess hall to hear. "Gentlemen, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not interested in your company, and I'd appreciate it if you respected that decision. Are we clear?" The mess hall had gone completely silent. Every soldier in the room was staring at the scene, trying to process what they had just witnessed. It had happened so fast and so smoothly that many of them weren't sure exactly what they had seen. It looked almost like an elaborate accident, as if the three men had somehow managed to disable themselves through their own clumsiness. But those with combat experience recognized the signs: the precise control, the economy of movement, the way Sarah had managed to neutralize three opponents without appearing to exert any real effort. This wasn't the work of someone who had learned self-defense at a weekend seminar. This was professional-level training in action. Webb's voice was strained as he spoke through gritted teeth. "Let go of my arm." Sarah's grip remained steady. "I asked if we were clear. I need to hear you say it." "We're clear," Webb gasped. Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who was still struggling to catch his breath. "Sergeant Rodriguez?" Rodriguez managed a nod between wheezes. "Clear." Morrison, wiping mashed potatoes from his eyes, mumbled his agreement. Sarah released Webb's arm and stood smoothly, her posture returning to the relaxed stance she had maintained before the confrontation began. To anyone watching, it was as if nothing had happened. Her breathing was normal, her uniform barely wrinkled, her expression calm and professional. Webb slowly got to his feet, cradling his arm and shooting murderous looks at Sarah, but he made no move to continue the confrontation. Whatever he had expected when he approached her, this outcome wasn't it. The three soldiers gathered themselves with as much dignity as they could manage and made their way toward the exit, avoiding eye contact with the rest of the mess hall. As they left, Webb turned back and called out, "This isn't over." Sarah's response was delivered in the same calm, professional tone she might use to discuss the weather. "Staff Sergeant Webb, if you feel the need to file a complaint about this incident, I encourage you to speak with your commanding officer. I'm sure he'd be very interested in your version of events." The implication was clear. Any official complaint would require Webb to explain exactly what he and his friends had been doing that led to their humiliation. Given the number of witnesses who had seen them corner a lone female soldier, that conversation would likely go very badly for all three men. Webb's face flushed red, but he said nothing more. The three soldiers left the mess hall, their departure followed by a buzz of conversation as everyone tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Sarah calmly collected a new tray and moved through the serving line again, replacing the dinner that had been destroyed in the confrontation. The kitchen staff, who had watched the entire incident, served her without comment, though she caught a few approving nods from the veteran NCO who supervised the mess hall operations. When Sarah sat down to eat her replacement dinner, she chose a table in the center of the room where she could observe all the entrances and exits. The conversations around her gradually returned to normal, though she remained the subject of numerous curious glances and whispered discussions. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a military police officer Sarah had briefly met during in-processing, approached her table. "Mind if I sit?" Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please." Gonzalez sat down and studied Sarah for a moment before speaking. "That was impressive. Where'd you learn to handle yourself like that?" Sarah took a bite of her chicken and considered her response. "Self-defense classes. My father thought it was important for a young woman to be able to protect herself." It wasn't entirely a lie. Sarah's father had indeed insisted on self-defense training, though he probably hadn't envisioned it would eventually include learning to kill with her bare hands in 17 different ways. Gonzalez nodded slowly. "Must have been some very good classes. Those three have been a problem since they arrived here. They seem to think their rank gives them certain privileges with female personnel." "Have there been complaints?" "A few informal ones. But you know how it is. Proving harassment can be difficult, especially when it's three men's word against one woman's. Most people don't want to rock the boat over what gets dismissed as boys being boys." Sarah understood the dynamic all too well. It was one of the reasons she had chosen to handle the situation herself rather than going through official channels. Sometimes the most effective response was the most direct one. "Well, hopefully they'll think twice before bothering anyone else," Sarah said. Gonzalez smiled. "Something tells me they will. Word's going to spread about what happened here tonight. Those three just found out that not everyone is going to be an easy target." As Gonzalez left, Sarah finished her meal in relative peace. The initial shock of the confrontation was wearing off, and normal mess hall activity was resuming around her. But she knew this was far from over. Webb and his friends would be embarrassed, angry, and looking for ways to salvage their reputations. Men like that didn't simply accept humiliation and move on. The next morning brought exactly the complications Sarah had expected. She was reviewing supply manifests in the logistics office when Captain James Mitchell, the base's executive officer, appeared in her doorway. His expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah could read the tension in his posture. "Lieutenant Chen, I need to see you in my office." "Now." Sarah saved her work and followed Mitchell through the corridors of the headquarters building. Other personnel they passed gave her curious looks, and she realized that news of the previous night's incident had spread throughout the base. In a closed community like a forward operating base, gossip traveled faster than radio signals. Mitchell's office was Spartan but functional, decorated only with unit awards and a photo of his family back home. He closed the door behind them and gestured for Sarah to take a seat across from his desk. "Lieutenant, I've received some interesting reports about an incident in the mess hall last night. 3 soldiers claim you assaulted them without provocation." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "That's not accurate, sir. I was approached by 3 soldiers who made unwelcome advances. When Staff Sergeant Webb attempted to grab me, I defended myself using minimal necessary force." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. "Minimal necessary force that left 3 combat veterans on the ground in under 15 seconds? I've had some training, sir." "Some training?" Mitchell pulled a file from his desk drawer. "Lieutenant, your personnel record is remarkably light on details. Your fitness reports are outstanding, your efficiency ratings are perfect, but there's very little information about your actual qualifications or previous assignments." Sarah felt a familiar tension building. This was the conversation she had hoped to avoid. "I'm a logistics officer, sir. Most of my previous work has been routine supply chain management." Routine supply chain management doesn't typically include advanced combat training. "I spoke with Sergeant Major Harrison this morning. He's been in the Army for 22 years, served with Special Forces, and he watched your little demonstration last night. His assessment was that you moved like someone with serious training, the kind of training that doesn't come from weekend self-defense classes." Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "So I made some calls this morning, tried to get some background information on exactly who you are and what you're really doing here. You know what I found?" Sarah remained silent. "I found a wall of classification levels that require clearances I don't have. I found transfer orders signed by people whose names I recognize but who definitely don't usually involve themselves in routine logistics assignments. And I found a very polite but firm suggestion that I should focus on my own responsibilities and not ask too many questions about yours." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that her cover was holding at the official level. Concern that she was attracting exactly the kind of attention her mission was designed to avoid. Mitchell continued. "Now, I don't know what your real assignment is here, and apparently, I'm not supposed to know. But I do know that 3 of my soldiers are claiming they were assaulted by a logistics officer, and I have a mess hall full of witnesses who saw something that doesn't match their story." "What exactly are they claiming happened, sir?" "According to Staff Sergeant Webb, they approached you to make friendly conversation, and you attacked them without warning. They want to file formal assault charges." Sarah almost smiled at the audacity. "And the witnesses?" "The witnesses tell a very different story. They describe 3 soldiers cornering a lone female officer, making inappropriate comments, and then somehow ending up on the ground after what appeared to be a very brief scuffle. Most of them seemed to think the 3 men got exactly what they deserved." Mitchell stood and walked to the window overlooking the base compound. "Here's my problem, Lieutenant. I've got 3 soldiers with bruised egos and sore bodies who want revenge. I've got a female officer whose background I apparently can't investigate. And I've got a base full of personnel who are now talking about nothing except what happened in that mess hall. I understand your position is difficult, sir." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've created a situation that could seriously disrupt unit cohesion and discipline. Word is spreading that there's someone on this base who can take down 3 soldiers without breaking a sweat. People are starting to ask questions about who you really are and what you're capable of. This was exactly what Sarah had hoped to avoid. Her mission required her to remain invisible, just another face in the crowd. Instead, she had become the subject of base-wide speculation and curiosity. "What do you recommend, sir?" Mitchell turned back to face her. "I'm going to deny the assault charges. The witness statements make it clear that you were defending yourself against unwelcome advances, but I'm also going to have a very serious conversation with Webb and his friends about their conduct. This kind of behavior toward female personnel stops now." Sarah nodded. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. I'm also implementing some changes to protect everyone involved. You're going to be eating your meals in the officers' mess from now on, not the enlisted dining facility. You'll also be provided with an escort for any activities that take you into areas where you might encounter those 3 soldiers." Sarah started to protest, but Mitchell held up a hand. "This isn't punishment, Lieutenant. This is risk management. Those 3 soldiers are angry and embarrassed, and angry men sometimes make poor decisions. Until they cool off or get transferred, I want to minimize contact between you and them. I can take care of myself, sir. Last night proved that, but next time they might bring friends or weapons, or they might catch you when you're not ready for trouble. I won't have a female officer assaulted on my base because I failed to take reasonable precautions." Sarah understood the logic, even if she didn't like the restrictions. Mitchell was trying to protect both her cover and her safety while managing a potentially explosive situation. "There's one more thing," Mitchell said. "Whatever your real mission here is, I suggest you complete it quickly. This incident has drawn attention to you, and that attention is only going to increase. People are curious about the mysterious logistics officer who fights like a special operations soldier. How long before someone starts asking the right questions to the right people?" Sarah's mission was scheduled to continue for another 2 weeks, but Mitchell was right. Her cover was compromised, even if not completely blown. Every day she remained would increase the risk of exposure. "I'll take your concerns under advisement, sir." Mitchell returned to his desk and picked up a phone. "Sergeant Major Harrison, please report to my office." He hung up and looked at Sarah. "Harrison is going to be your escort. He's discreet, competent, and he understands operational security. He'll also make sure word spreads that you're under official protection, which should discourage anyone from testing you again." A knock at the door announced Harrison's arrival. The sergeant major was exactly what Sarah expected from Mitchell's description, a weathered veteran with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen everything the military had to offer. "Sergeant Major," Mitchell said, "you're going to be providing security support for Lieutenant Chen during the remainder of her assignment here. I want her movements monitored and any potential problems addressed before they escalate." Harrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Understood, sir. Will this be a close protection detail?" "Discreet observation unless circumstances require direct intervention. The lieutenant has demonstrated she can handle herself, but I want backup available if needed." As Sarah left Mitchell's office with Harrison, she realized that her carefully planned mission had taken an unexpected turn. Instead of operating in anonymous obscurity, she now had official protection and base-wide notoriety. Her next intelligence contact wasn't scheduled for 3 days, but she was already considering ways to accelerate her timeline. Harrison walked silently beside her as they headed back toward the logistics office. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Ma'am, I don't know what your real job is here, and I don't need to know. But I served with people who moved like you do last night. Special people doing special jobs. If there's anything you need to complete your work here, you just let me know." Sarah nodded her appreciation. Having an ally like Harrison could actually be beneficial, even if it meant her cover was partially compromised. Over the following days, the base settled into a new routine. Webb and his companions kept their distance, shooting resentful looks whenever they encountered Sarah, but making no direct approaches. Harrison maintained his discreet observation, professional enough that his presence felt like support rather than surveillance. The speculation about Sarah's background continued, but gradually faded as other events captured the base's attention. Her carefully maintained logistics officer cover held, supported by realistic paperwork and convincing technical knowledge. On her final day at the base, Sarah completed her intelligence-gathering mission successfully. The information she had collected would help prevent a terrorist attack that could have killed hundreds of civilians. Her cover remained intact enough that she could potentially return to the base for future operations if needed. As she prepared to leave, Harrison approached her one last time. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know that what you did in that mess hall was important. Those three have been a problem for a long time, and nobody seemed willing or able to address it. You standing up to them sent a message to every woman on this base that they don't have to tolerate that behavior." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the most important missions aren't the ones you planned for, Sergeant Major." "Yes, ma'am. Safe travels." As Sarah's transport lifted off from the base, she reflected on the unexpected turn her mission had taken. She had come to gather intelligence and instead had struck a blow against harassment and intimidation. The three soldiers who had cornered her in the mess hall had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one who looked least threatening. Her 45 seconds of action had accomplished more than just mission success. They had sent a message that would resonate throughout the base long after she was gone. Sometimes the best operations were the ones where you saved more than just the mission. You saved people's dignity, safety, and belief that justice was possible even in difficult circumstances. The mess hall incident would become a legend, growing slightly with each retelling but always carrying the same core message: respect others, or face the consequences. And somewhere in a classified file, a brief note would be added to Sarah's record acknowledging her successful completion of yet another mission, with no mention of the unofficial lesson in accountability she had delivered along the way.